Metagaming, table talk, player knowledge versus character knowledge. There are a lot of terms used for this action. And let me tell you why, in some cases, metagaming can be an effective tool as a player, as a character, and for you as a dungeon master. But first, let's go over this. So, the act of metagaming, table talk, player knowledge versus character knowledge, is the notion that you as a person at the table, not a character, but you as a real-life person at the table, knows something about the world that your character would not know. And relaying that information out of character to the rest of the party and using that knowledge as if your character already knew it. So an example of this would be a party of level 2 or 3 adventurers who have never seen a troll before, and they go, "Oh, it's a troll, what do we do?" And one of the players goes, "Well, I read the monster manual, and trolls are vulnerable to fire, so we should just use fire spells." And that would be an example of metagaming, because your character necessarily didn't know that knowledge. You just, as the player, know that knowledge and share it with the rest of the party. And so now the party, as players, know this knowledge, or the players already knew this, but they were acting as their characters did not know this knowledge. The main issue that people have with metagaming is that it's used in a way to undermine or circumvent the Dungeon Master's attempts at challenge. And so, typically, Dungeon Masters, they either punish the person by not following the conventional rules of the monster, or they make completely homebrew monsters and don't give the stat blocks to the players to look at, thus kind of creating a sense of, well, you as the Dungeon Master, you're just making shit up. This way, all of our planning doesn't work. And either way, it's bad, because you're punishing a player for being invested in the hobby, but having a very sore way of expressing it. Or you're actively punishing the rest of the players for one person, or possibly the entire party, because now they don't know what you're going to do. Everything's an unknown. Here's my opinion on this. Metagaming, in the sense of knowing things about monsters and spells and effects and things like that about the game, and using it in a way that would make sense for your character to know is okay, or is based on some form of logic. So, an example I always use is the following. Let's say your character has never seen a dragon before. Never seen one. And their first inclination with a dragon is a red one. Pretty standard. Red dragons are pretty standard enemies. And your character is supposed to be smarter than you as a player. Just innately, because they are as powerful as they are. Regardless of how low level they are currently, they are supposed to be smarter and more powerful than you as a player. So, you as the character have never seen a dragon before. In your first interaction with one, it's a red dragon. So naturally you're going to try a bunch of stuff. When you try reasoning with it, it doesn't work. So naturally your character can conclude that a red dragon is very arrogant and doesn't listen to reason and thinks they're better than everyone else, which is an accurate description in the monster manual. And as the DM describes the dragon, saying that its scales seem very thick, you can deduce that it has a very high AC. That's an accurate description. And then when the combat actually starts, the dragon goes first, and it breathes fire. Now, based on your knowledge as a player, you have read the monster manual, so you already know that this is immune to fire. However, as your character, you can deduce the following. Because you've never seen a dragon, you've only ever heard about them in legends, and the fact that it's breathing fire and not being harmed by it, you as the character can reasonably deduce that the color and the breath weapon are equal parts to indicate what the dragon would be somewhat immune or resistant to. So because it is a red dragon and it is spewing fire, your character can reasonably deduce that using fire against a red dragon will either have diminishing returns or not work at all. So relaying that information to the party based on your logical conclusion as a character, which is supposed to be smarter than you, is in a way a good form of metagaming. Because when you first run into a dragon, your character in character doesn't just say, "Oh, a red dragon, we're going to have to bring different kinds of spells because fire won't work on them." Your character doesn't know that. But then upon observing the creature, you are able to make reasonable deductions. I think that form of metagaming is fine. Weaving it into the story and knowing how a character would think logically about a situation, I do not think is a bad form of metagaming. It's bad when as soon as a creature is introduced or stated, the players act as if their characters already know everything about that and thus plan accordingly. Unless information has been gathered prior to this, or they have prior experience, every enemy that they have met up to this point should have given them little to no inclination as to what they should be doing. If all you've been fighting thus far have been goblinoids and trolls and kobolds, and your first inclination with a dragon is to just try whatever's been working, realizing that doesn't work, and then trying something else and realizing that works better, that's a lot better than just assuming, well, I know what these enemies do. I know what they are because I've read about them in the monster manual, so I will tell my party in character to plan accordingly because I, as the player, know this information, but my character necessarily does not. The only way that I think that this kind of metagaming can work, where you as the player know this information, but your character doesn't know this information necessarily, is if the Dungeon Master presents you with an opportunity to gather the information that you, as a player, already know. Or has been given resources that allow you to essentially make that assumption. Or you have been given prior experience with that kind of creature. So, back to the Red Dragon example, because you as a character have never seen a dragon before, and you've met a red dragon, and you have deduced that the color and the breath weapon indicates what the creature may be resistant or immune to, the next time you run into a dragon, you take an assessment. And you deduce what it may or may not be resistant to. So, if you defeat the red dragon, and then you're immediately sent on a quest to go defeat a blue dragon, well, your logic would be, okay, it's blue. So, blue, it could be a couple of things. It could either be cold, it could be lightning, it could be some weird form of water dragon that does bludgeoning damage. There's a lot of options here. So then you take environmental clues, like, well, it's living up high in the mountains, so it's clearly not water. but the other two are still very much thing, because high up on the mountains is very cold, and lightning tends to strike the path of least resistance. So logic would dictate it could be one of the two. So when you meet it, there's still no inclination, unless the Dungeon Master specifically gives you a descriptor that gives away what you should have planned for. Like, that the energy in the air is like electrifying, then you know, oh, it's a lightning damage, not cold damage. I think that form of metagaming is just fine. Metagaming in certain aspects of the game is perfectly fine, but not to the extent of undermining the Dungeon Master to the point of him having to essentially make nothing but homebrew monsters or enemies for you to fight. This way you can never guess what he can do. So yeah, just keep your metagaming to a minimal and really make logical deductions in character, instead of just blurting out the first thing that you know about the monster.